What's up, everyone? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of my podcast. Today's podcast is entitled Hindsight, and as usual, I'll begin this podcast with a quote. Life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. And that's a quote by John Lennon. So as we've discussed in previous podcasts, for those of you who, are just tuning in, maybe this is your first podcast, part of my morning routine is to state the 4 agreements. In fact, on a daily basis, I try to say these agreements no less than 3 times a day, in the morning, in the noon, and at night. The 4 agreements are: have an impeccable word, don't take things personally, never make assumptions, and always do your best. When I was online for my fraternity, undergoing the, educational part of my process, this is something that was an extra gift or extra bit of information that my instructor gave me. It wasn't in our curriculum per se that we had to learn, or anything that was, groundbreaking or fundamental for us to memorize for our process. But for some reason, I just took a hold of these 4 agreements, and I deemed them to be so important in my life that I state them on a daily basis. And it's something that I try to live by day in and day out. And it's really been helpful, if it hasn't been anything else other than a reminder of, 4 simple tasks that I need to complete throughout my day, throughout my life, that can help me to get to a better place and a more successful place in my life. I said 4 simple tasks, but if you really apply things, or really apply these 4 insightful suggestions and how we should live our lives, it can be difficult at times, especially when you're fighting against yourself, fighting against, conditioning and being taught certain things time and time again over the course of your life. It can be very difficult to fight those battles, because your brain and your mind, it knows you. It knows who you are. It knows your weaknesses. It knows, your kryptonite. There's no better enemy. So battling that mind is probably one of the most difficult endeavors you're ever going to undertake. However, the 3rd agreement is, like I stated earlier, to never make assumptions. It has taken recent events occurring in my life to see how powerful making this declaration really is. And not only making the declaration, but also applying the declaration in my life. So, all of these declarations are powerful. Having an impeccable word. We all want to be somebody who's known as a man or woman of our word. We're known to be somebody who keeps their word and who could be trusted and is dependable. Don't take things personally. That's another big one that I've been really having to deal with or experience in life, about how to not take things personally, how to, kind of shrug things off, and how to tell my ego to shut up when it tries to take the forefront of my mind and send my emotions into, a place where they're uncontrolled. The 3rd one, never make assumptions. Again, that's why I'm making this podcast. It's another one of the 4 that have been really prevalent in my life. And it's kind of funny how, these 4 agreements I have deemed to be so important in my life. And at certain times and places in my life, one agreement will always be kind of pushed to the forefront above the other 3 agreements. And it's, it's been never make assumptions. This has been one that's been most prevalent here recently, I would say, for the last couple months. But when I really look at the situation, it's been the last probably 6 years, maybe even more than that. If I really sit back and look at it, I've made assumptions on things that, hindsight, looking back, I should have gathered more information. I should have been more patient, and I should have waited. Patience hasn't always been my strong suit, and it's been costly. And it's one of the lessons that I have, stated, that life has been kind of putting on repeat in my experience through this journey. Whenever we make an assumption, we open ourselves up to the unknown. When you make an assumption, it is usually your attempt to make sense of an otherwise illogical situation. An assumption is nothing more than you trying to make sense of the world. And here, in a few more bullet points in the podcast, we're going to discuss, kind of where that comes from and why we do it. But it's funny how our mind and our body works. If you do any type of, research or study into how the mind and the body works, which I highly encourage, not to say that I'm any type of scholar or expert on the matter, but I do kind of, know some of the phenomenon and the, the intricacies of how, our perception isn't always reality, how our mind kind of fills in spaces and kind of tricks our reality into it being a perceived reality instead of an actuality. So I would encourage you to do some research and into some of the things that the brain does and how the brain operates. But again, as we've talked about in other podcasts, like, perception is reality, and perception isn't always actuality. Just like I said, the brain sometimes does little tricks where it fills in spaces or fills in gaps or makes you remember things in a different way. So it's not always honest. It's doing its best to be efficient, but that doesn't always mean that it's going to be honest or it's going to reflect actuality. So when we try to make sense of an otherwise illogical situation, instead of making an assumption, it would be better if we just take a step back, be patient, and if we have the time and we're in the place that we can do it, we gather as much information as humanly possible. The definition of an assumption is a thing that is accepted as true or as certain to happen without proof. That's just the definition. I got that off of Google. Basically, it says what I stated above it. You're taking something that is, and you're making it into something else without having the proof to substantiate that claim. Basically, without having the proof to jump from A to Z. There's a whole alphabet in between A to Z, but you feel, based on a host of other things that we're going to discuss later in the podcast, that you can make this guess, and it's not even an educated guess like a hypothesis or anything like that, but you feel that you have enough information to make this guess and that it's going to be successful. And sometimes it is. Sometimes we just have to make assumptions with what we have at that point in time. But largely, assumptions are not factual, and they can lead to mistakes, and it can lead to hardships and just a lot of unnecessary things that you might have to go through because you didn't take the time or execute enough patience in order to get more information so you can make an informed decision. The key sentence in the aforementioned definition is without proof. Now, there is no possibility that in every situation we will have all the information readily available, but to make an assumption is a fatal mistake. Again, you're not going to be able to sit back. You're not going to be able to have all the pieces to the puzzle at all points in your journey. You're not going to be able to just be, methodical all the time. You're not going to be able to just, sit back and kind of let life happen. There's going to be times when you're going to have to be decisive. There's going to be times when you're going to have to take what information you have and make the best decision that you can make at that point in time. Waiting around for all the information that may or may never come can lead to problems in and of itself. We need to be decisive. We need to be people that aren't afraid to take action. We need to be confident in our abilities and who we are and what we've done, because even if you make a decision from a decisive standpoint and it's not the correct decision or it's not the right decision, you at least made the best decision that you could make at that point in time with the information that you had. And having confidence in your ability, who you are, what you've done, where you've come from, you can then overcome any obstacles that may present themselves along the way. Now, being decisive is making a decision based on the best information that you have in that point in time. Making an assumption is making a guess based on a limited amount of information that you may or may not have at that point in time. So I don't want to get like make any type of confusion around being decisive and making assumptions. I don't want them to seem like they're the same thing. Being decisive is taking action based on facts or based on evidence, even if the evidence or those facts are yourself. Like, hey, I'm going to make this decision and I know it's going to be good regardless if things don't turn out the way I want to or the way I expect them to, because I know who I am and I know that I can make things better, or I'll make things right, or I'll adapt. An assumption is just, hey, I'm going to pick this way. I'm going to decide to go left instead of right because I just feel comfortable doing it and it's always worked for me in the past. So I'm just going to make the assumption that going left is going to be okay. And I'm sure that using those two examples, you could see the issue in just being assumptive instead of being decisive. So why do we make assumptions? Well, in some ways, the brain is designed to make assumptions. It searches for patterns, or what scientists call mental models, to make it a more efficient machine. Again, there's a lot of different mental models and tricks, I call them, that the brain plays, like when you're reading, how it'll fill in a word or correct the word even though that word may be wrong, or how you'll remember things differently, or I mean, there's a ton of them. I didn't cover them in this podcast because I didn't want to detract away from the main point of the podcast, which is assumptions. But there's a lot of things to do. There's a lot of things that the brain does in order to be efficient. And making assumptions is one of those things. And again, this is why we have to be aware that perception is our reality, but it's not always actuality. It's not always what you're going through or all the information, or seeing the whole picture. Sometimes our perception can be a very narrow view of the full picture, the full spectrum of what we're going through or what we're dealing with. Many assumptions are actually learned behaviors. They come from our culture, our families, and from what we were taught to think as a child. This is pretty much where everything comes from. This is how we're made, from our experiences, from what we go through as children, from what we go through as adults, teenagers, just our life in general. We are a sum total of all of our experiences and different things that we've gone through. So an assumption, again, is a decision that our brain feels safe on making because it's using indicators and cues from the past, things that people have told us, experiences that we've had, in order to make an assumption that it feels is safe. And all of that stuff might not be correct. The traumas that you faced, the stuff that you were told, the experiences that you had, they might not be correct. They might not be the best platform from which we should make decisions from, because as we grow older, we evolve and our mindsets change. We learn new information. We become different in many different type of ways. So the way that we think or that we were taught as a child might not be necessarily the way that we think as an adult, or the way that we decide to, make decisions, or the things that we decide are important in our decision making process. So much can change between being a child and being an adult. And to base a decision that will affect your present and possibly your future on information that you've received in the past is a bad decision. Like I said, it's a vital mistake. Now, again, there's a flip side to the coin, the whole dichotomy issue, that, assumptions can save your life at a certain point in time. Like the whole caveman, theory and stuff like that, that you didn't eat this because this color fruit or whatever killed somebody in your tribe. So now you make the assumption that all fruits that color are bad, which keeps you from eating that bad fruit, and so on and so forth. I understand that. But the exception doesn't beat the rule. And also, we are not cavemen. This is 2021. We have access to more information than any other period of time in the world. So to make an assumption based on past information or outdated information is not a way to set yourself up for success. It's not a way that you can make the best decisions possible in your life. Again, there might come a time and place where you might have to be decisive, but I don't think there's ever a point in time where, well, I take that back, because there are exceptions. I don't want to say never or ever, because when you use never or always in a sentence, it automatically becomes a lie in most instances. But I'm sure there are instances where making assumptions, again, with the whole caveman logic and going with that theory, that making assumptions can apply in some scenarios to be a useful way of going forth and going about decisions. However, I'm not a big person that would push that decision making. I would rather us be decisive over making assumptions, because being decisive comes from a place of evidence and logic and thinking and a method, whereas assumption is just, hey, this is my best guess, I'm going to do what always worked. So how do we stop making assumptions? How do we break that habit and get out of that little loop of doing what we've always done and what's comfortable? We learn how to recognize that we're making the assumptions, learn how to step back, learn how to look at the bigger picture, learn how to question what you do and what you don't do, and am I making the best decision based on the information that I have? Like, am I just doing something because I'm scared and this is what's always kept me safe? Or should I make a decision another way or for another reason? Ask good questions about your assumptions. Question the assumption. Like, if you make an assumption, why am I making this assumption? Is this assumption correct? What information do I have that goes against this assumption? What information do I have that goes for this assumption or proves that this assumption is credible or is the correct course of action to take? And many other questions. Question yourself. Question others. Question everything. I think it's really, really unwise to just see something and take it as 100% without questioning it. I mean, that goes for anything and everything. I feel that you should question anything and everything, because, asking questions and getting answers will help you to have more confidence in your decision, instead of just having unanswered questions floating around in your head. And now you're trying to make a decision based on logic that you're trying to use to fill in the blanks. Like, oh, this is that way, so this must be the case. That's not always going to help you. It's not always going to help you. Next, agree to not have control of everything. You're not going to be in control of everything. This life is crazy. It has roller coasters. It goes straight down, all the way down, and then when you think it can't go down any further, it goes down some more, and then all of a sudden things will turn around and it'll shoot back up, and then you'll be on top of the world and the view is wonderful, and next thing you know you're going back down, or maybe it plateaus. But life is just crazy, and you could try to predict it as best as possible, but there's going to be something that happens that you just can't predict, that you can't expect to happen. And that's okay, because it's life, and you just have to go with the blows, just adapt, achieve, and overcome, and you'll be okay. Be decisive, and you'll be okay. One way or another, you'll be okay. Next, look for places you feel stuck. Instead of getting to a place where you can't go any further and then making an assumption from that place onto infinity or into oblivion, why not, when you get to that place of being stuck, you step back, and you just take a breath, a tactical pause, and evaluate the situation. Like, why am I stuck? What information am I missing? What information can I get a hold to? How can I improve my situation? How can I get unstuck, basically? Again, and it comes just from questioning yourself. Instead of being in such a rush to make a decision, step back if you got the time, pause, breathe, and then make the decision. And the fifth one is become mindful. Mindfulness to me is being aware of who you are, your surroundings, your traumas, your mind, your ego, your energy. Being mindful is just being aware of your internal condition and how it has a direct correlation to your external existence. Because nothing happens by chance. Everything is related to everything. The reason that this is happening in your life is in direct correlation with something that you have done or that you are doing. You are the key. In every situation that you're going to face, the one commonality between all of that is going to be you. You're going to be a part of every situation that you're going to face. So being mindful is basically being aware of your surroundings and being aware of how you have an effect on your surroundings, or you have an effect on your life. So being mindful of all of this will help you to make better decisions, like being mindful of the traumas that you're facing, being mindful of the place that you're making a decision from, like if it's a place of hurt or a place of anger or a place of anxiety. You need to be mindful of those things, because being mindful of those things might change your decision altogether. And it might take the assumption out of your decision, because if you're making an assumption from a place of anger, then you can deal with that anger and then make a better decision now based on a clear mind, a clear heart, and you can go forward from that point on. But again, this is just a lesson that life has been teaching me. It's something that I'm going back and I'm researching on, trying to find out as much as I possibly can, because knowledge is power, and the application of that knowledge is what gives us the power to be able to thrive and to exist in life the way we want to, instead of allowing life to dictate our circumstances and how we're going to live and how we're going to thrive. So it's just another lesson out there. Again, this is much for me as it is for you, but I hope you get something from it, and have a great night.